With the many lawsuits filed by the Trump campaign, many are wondering what the Trump team's strategies are and what potential scenarios may play out. NTD's Christina Kim spoke with legal expert and attorney Alan Dershowitz for his analysis of the situation.
Alan Dershowitz is a renowned lawyer, retired Harvard Law professor, and the host of a podcast called The Dersh Show. Professor Dershowitz started by mentioning two general categories of lawsuits in this election, which he described as wholesale and retail challenges. Wholesale challenges, like the one in Pennsylvania, deal with broad legal questions that potentially impact thousands of votes in one case. Retail lawsuits, like the legal challenges in Michigan or Arizona, are lawsuits that deal with issues on a case-by-case scenario. These cases have a much smaller impact and are more difficult to prove because they need to go through trials. He discussed what he thinks is the Trump campaign's legal strategy.
The strategy of the Trump team is not to get Trump to 270. That's impossible. The strategy is to keep Biden from getting 270. And the way they think they can do that is by having enough challenges so that states won't certify the electors in time for the mid-December meeting.
He said if the electors don't have 270 votes for Biden by the mid-December meeting, then the election would go to the House of Representatives, where Trump could win the election. This is because in presidential elections, each state gets only one vote from their delegate, and Republicans control more state delegations to the House of Representatives. Dershowitz also noted that the case in Pennsylvania has nothing to do with lawsuit amendments or legal strategy, but has everything to do with numbers.
If the number of voters that voted for Biden over Trump exceeds the number of votes that are being challenged, then the issue becomes moot and the Supreme Court won't take the case. But if the number of challenged votes exceed the difference between Biden and Trump, then the Supreme Court will take the case, and I think will probably rule in favor of Trump.
Dershowitz said that in the end, he does not believe the lawsuits will bring about a reversal of fortune for President Trump. He referenced claims from Trump's lawyers of election software switching millions of votes from Trump to Biden. Sidney Powell, a lawyer for the Trump campaign, suggested in a Sunday interview with Fox Business that the president's legal team is getting ready to overturn election results in multiple states. Powell said she had enough evidence of election fraud to launch a widespread criminal investigation.
If that turned out to be true, and again, I haven't seen the evidence, I've just heard the lawyers talk about it, that would change a lot of things, and that could cause a major disruption and shift. And of course, the American public would be very upset because they've been told by the networks who the winner is already.
He went on to say that if it were found that hundreds of thousands or millions of votes were found to have switched, he does not know how it would play out, because we've never had computers play such a major role in the election. The professor said in that case, the issue would go up to the Supreme Court to be decided. Dershowitz reminded us that lawsuits and recounts are all part of the election process. He went on to say that he thinks Trump should start to cooperate with Biden's transition team, but that Trump should not necessarily concede or call off the lawsuits. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Trump's legal team says they have enough evidence that voting systems were used to rig the election to overturn the election results. And a Trump lawyer alleges that the voting system used in this election has ties to a company involved with the Venezuelan socialist regime. NTD's Grace Coulter breaks it down for us.
President Trump's lawyer Rudy Giuliani is alleging that the voting systems and software used in the election are responsible for widespread voter fraud. Among the companies in question are Dominion Voting Systems and Smartmatic. Dominion is a Canadian company that's used in nearly 30 states in the U.S., including in Georgia, Nevada, Michigan, and Arizona, all of which have allegations of voter fraud. Dominion has come under increased scrutiny ever since a glitch was discovered in Michigan, where 6,000 votes for Trump were flipped to Joe Biden. And this isn't the first time Dominion has come under scrutiny. In 2019, Democratic legislators requested information about Dominion voting systems, citing security concerns. And in January this year, U.S. lawmakers also expressed concern about foreign involvement and the integrity of their systems. After questioning, CEO of Dominion revealed that they rely heavily on Chinese parts. In a tweet on Saturday, Giuliani alleged that Dominion is just a front and that the company Smartmatic was really doing the computing for the election. Smartmatic was founded by 3 Venezuelan engineers in 2000, and its software was first used in Venezuela. Its headquarters is now in London. However, the company has maintained close ties to socialist Venezuela, a country whose government has close ties to the Chinese Communist Party. As reported by the New York Times in 2006, Smartmatic was under investigation for its ties to the Chavez regime after he was elected through the use of Smartmatic software. Smartmatic was a little-known firm with no experience in voting technology before it was chosen by the Venezuelan authorities to replace the country's election machinery ahead of a contentious referendum that confirmed Mr. Chavez as president in 2004. Though Smartmatic has now established itself overseas, allegations of its connections with the Chavez regime continue. It is known that Smartmatic and Dominion voting systems have had close ties over the years. Venezuelan-led Smartmatic brought U.S.-based Sequoia voting systems and then sold it in 2006 after the U.S. led investigations into Smartmatic's connections to the Venezuelan regime. It's believed that at this time, Smartmatic put its technology into Sequoia. Dominion later went on to buy Sequoia in 2010 and is still its parent company. According to a report by Voter Action, in 2008, Smartmatic still had ownership of intellectual property rights for some of Sequoia's currently deployed election products. Dominion denies having any ties to Smartmatic now, though at one point Dominion also allowed Smartmatic to use its technology. In a lawsuit filed by Dominion against Smartmatic for violating a non-competition provision, it states, Dominion granted Smartmatic a worldwide non-exclusive license to certain voting systems that Dominion had developed. The license agreement granted Smartmatic rights to certain patents and patent applications that Dominion owned or controlled, and to all know-how, trade secrets, methodologies, and other technical information owned or possessed by Dominion. Dominion has denied all allegations. A Trump campaign lawyer and former federal prosecutor Sidney Powell claimed in a Sunday interview with Fox Business that election software switched millions of votes from President Trump to Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden. She said they're getting ready to overturn the election results in multiple states, and added that she has enough evidence of election fraud to launch a widespread criminal investigation. Reporting by Grace Coulter, NTD News.
Republican Senator Ron Johnson says he will continue investigating the Biden family's business dealings after the new Congress is sworn in. Johnson told The Hill he is not going to turn a blind eye to recent developments in the investigation. He also says he's confident that more financial transactions will be revealed. A former associate of Hunter Biden, Tony Bobulinski, recently went public about Joe Biden's son and his overseas business dealings. It became the subject of scrutiny and big censorship last month. Johnson and Iowa Republican Senator Chuck Grassley have been investigating the Bidens' overseas business deals, which have been long suspected of corruption. Ahead of this year's election, Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg donated hundreds of millions of dollars to a private nonprofit, which then granted the money to local elections boards in key swing states. Now, a watchdog group has filed lawsuits in many of those states. NTD's Melina Weisskopf spoke to an assistant attorney involved with the suits to understand the basis of their arguments and other potential issues with Zuckerberg's donations.
Centers for Tech and Civic Life is a nonprofit founded in 2015 by Tina Epps Johnson, Whitney May, and Donnie Bridges. According to the website, their goal is to help Americans stay civically engaged and keep elections secure. Before the 2020 election, the organization only had around $700,000 donated each year to spend on their efforts. But this year, Mark Zuckerberg and his wife donated at least $350 million to the nonprofit. The money was then granted to local elections offices. According to Ballotpedia, the most money was given to key swing areas, $3.5 million to Wayne County in Michigan, $6 million to Fulton County in Georgia, and $10 million to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And that's just a fraction of it.
They did get out the vote efforts. They did media to get out the vote. They hired poll workers and poll judges. And so, if you think about that, what if we went into criminal court? I used to be a prosecutor, and we had, Facebook money essentially paying our judges. Is that something is that the kind of thing that we want? So what we fear is kind of an arms race where private companies, if you want to run for office, you got to say, okay, well, what palm do I have to grease in order to make sure I can get the vote turnout in the city that I need to win it? And that's kind of what our focus has been.
Griffin's the special counsel to the Amistad Project of the Thomas More Society, a nonprofit watchdog group which has now filed lawsuits in multiple states to challenge the legality of these private grants. Griffin explains in addition to the grants being selectively distributed to the key swing areas, there were strings attached to how the elections offices could spend the money.
There's actually a written contract between the city of, I want to say the city of Philadelphia and CCTL. And it actually talks about requirements that need to be met. And if they're not met, then they're not given the grant. So I think the drop box is a good example, right? In Detroit, you can hardly walk through Detroit without tripping over a drop box every couple of blocks. But if you go into a rural area or an area that Trump won, or generally a Republican area, you'd have to go miles to get to a drop box. And so they wanted to make it easy for Democrats to vote and they didn't do anything to help Republicans vote. And our whole thing is that if government wants to make it easier to vote, we say do that. The only key here is it needs to be equal. And that's why it probably should go through the legislator, because if the legislator passed a law in Pennsylvania, they could get everybody equality in the entire state. But what CCTL did is they went to Philadelphia and they said, hey, we're going to give you this money, but you have to use it in certain ways to help get out the vote in Philadelphia. And that's a problem.
He stayed in Detroit to observe the vote counting. Many GOP members complained they were wrongfully kicked out of the counting area on the second day. But Griffin explains a good number of GOP members were actually inside the ballot counting area. But he says the ratio of Democrats to Republicans was not at all equal. And they were being paid by the CTCL Center's donations, therefore heavily funded by Zuckerberg's donations.
You have this one group paying poll workers, and these poll workers, they're called inspectors in Michigan, the poll inspectors, but poll workers, they're being paid by this private organization. It's run through the city of Detroit, but we come to find out they're almost all Democrat. And that was an issue that we had in Detroit is we're saying, hey, the law says that at each one of these AV counting boards, each table where they're counting votes, there needs to be, the law says one representative of each of the two major political parties. And we're asking, where are the Republicans? Where are the Republicans? And the answer is there are none.
And those are just some examples of suspicious activity laid out in the case against these private donations. The Amistad Project's lawsuits have been filed in states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and others. NTD will keep you updated as more information comes out about these cases. Reporting by Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.